Welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us here today. We're talking about the power of embedded finance in the Middle East. Thank you for joining us. I think we may just hang around for a few minutes as people come into this room. And really wanted to first of all introduce myself. I'm Matthew Gardner. I'm the founder of A1AI. I've worked on embedded finance with tier 1 banks, smaller banks, startups all around the world. Really done quite a lot of work in the Middle East. Also in Australia, China, Southeast Asia, Europe, and starting to do a bit in the US now. So really pleased to be here. Also really pleased to introduce Mossad Al-Ghamdi. He is the founder, head of banking and insurance sector rather at SIMAH. Michelle Katics from the BankersLab, and Charles Latigan, he is director of advisory services Middle East at Qarar. That's who we are. I wanted to really give you an overview of embedded finance in the world, how it's developed, what it is. If you have any questions at any point, please just do put them in the chat. We'll have a Q&A at the end too, but just do put questions up as they come to you. So I wanted to talk about embedded finance in the world, and also then particularly in the region and in Saudi Arabia. You know, very exciting, dynamic way of banking. In a way, it's not really banking, it's not finance. It turns the world on its head, increases profitability. So really wanted to tell you what was happening out there, and then look at the work that's been done with FinTech Saudi. I know that 2 fully digital banks have just got licenses recently in Saudi Arabia. So exciting time. When you look at the dynamics in the Middle East as well, particularly the dynamics around FinTech in Saudi Arabia, a really big market. MENA lies beyond, and the rest of the world lies beyond too. So really pleased to be with you here. I wonder, would the panelists like to introduce themselves and talk a little bit about their work as well, just whilst we get going?
Sure, Matthew. So should I go ahead and start?
Yeah, please do. And then throw it to the next person.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Matthew, and welcome to Charles and Michelle. My name is Mossad Al-Ghamdi. I'm the head of banking and insurance sector within the business development for SIMAH, the Saudi Credit Bureau. And for everyone in Saudi Arabia, in particular in GCC as well, they would know SIMAH as the biggest credit bureau, and we've been around for over 18 years. We own the credit information for commercial and consumer in Saudi Arabia. And with that comes a lot of data that we support our members with and our consumers with our members. So hopefully we'll be adding our inputs to this discussion, and we'll see how it goes.
Thank you, Mossad. And I guess look forward to hearing your insights, and we'll be on to those very soon. And Michelle, please do tell us more about the BankersLab and the work you do globally.
Good afternoon, everybody. BankersLab has been working globally and specifically with SIMAH in Saudi and Qarar in the region for a number of years. BankersLab really focuses on simulation. And when we started this a number of years ago, the idea was, you wouldn't get on an airplane if the pilot had learned to drive it using a textbook or a PowerPoint. You'd want to get on an airplane knowing that the pilot had gone through many cycles of simulation through storms and takeoffs and landings in a simulated environment before they did something complicated. And we feel that in banking, there are a lot of things you need to understand technically and intuitively. And that's why we created a simulation platform. These days, the use case for that has expanded with the growth of digital banking as a pre-implementation solution. So when you're creating a new portfolio or a new business, we can run through strategy simulations first. Then you can go to Qarar and SIMAH and say, okay, we're ready to go live. We know what we want to do. So it's really exciting times for us as we see new types of products. Now we get to work outside the financial sector with non-financial companies, such as manufacturing, who are launching their own embedded finance. So these days, to be able to work with the software of Qarar and the data of SIMAH is just a really fun synergy for us in the region. So happy to be here today.
Thank you so much. And now, Charles, please welcome. I wonder, could you tell everyone a little bit about yourself and your work?
Sure. Hi, Matthew. Hi, everyone. Really privileged to be here today. I am the Director of Advisory for the Middle East for Qarar. SIMAH seems to be the common denominator for the call today, but essentially we're also affiliated with SIMAH within the kingdom, but also do broader business within the GCC. We are largely an analytics and software company that essentially takes the data that the organizations provide and churn out some advanced analytics from there, and use that analytics essentially to make decisions through software. So essentially we've been around for about 15 years within the region. And I have to say, we work all over the GCC at this stage. It's an exciting time to be within the region, with so many interesting pop-ups and fintechs popping up across the region. So it's a very interesting time to be here. So excited to be part of this session. Thank you, Matt.
Thank you too. I'm very honoured to be here with everybody. So without any further ado, I guess let me give you a brief overview of embedded finance around the world before we move to the region, and then the panelists will be also talking about their work with it. So really thinking what and why, as I said, go through industry examples, how do we get there from here, and then we'll have a Q&A. That's the format today. So we'll kick off with a poll, and that is, what do you think the role of banks will be in 2030? And so we'll give you about 10 to 30 seconds to respond to that. Will it be the same as it is today? Dominant again after seeing the threat of fintech. Will banks be platforms, or will they be what we call dumb pipes, just there to service other industries? Okay, and then I guess we'll go on. There we are. So yeah, not surprised to hear a lot of people think there will be platforms. Same, yes, around 9%, dominant 13%, dumb pipe 9%, extinct 9%. So yeah, big majority around platforms. That's what we see. I'm hosting a fintech conference in London today, and a lot of conversation really around platforms. We have a bank, Starling Bank, who have become a big platform who are now in the real economy. So yes, that's the results. And just compare the results to a survey which was taken. Just check those. So this is a survey commissioned by Tribe recently. And again, 51% thought they'd be platforms. Around the same, 7%, exactly the same as today. 2.4% dominant. 0.8% thought they're extinct. Or 37% thought telco operators, dumb pipes. So a bit of a different split, but definitely majority around platforms. And that's what I've observed in my work around the world with embedded finance. There's certainly a lot of platforms and networks evolving. So ready to tell you more about what I've seen. So really, what is embedded finance? So can't really be designed as part of finance in a way. It turns everything on its head. It certainly involves money, but it's more about end-to-end lack of friction. As you say, you don't wake up in the morning and think, I want to get a mortgage. You wake up in the morning and think, I want to buy a house. Or you don't wake up and think, I want to get a car loan. You just go and go to the dealership and look at a car. So embedded finance is very much in that vein. It's about making finance invisible and threading the whole way through. So there's quite a lot of text on these slides. Please refer to them later if you want a more deep overview, but that's the kind of macro view. It's just a quick thread. So I'll give you some industry examples. So globally, we have the likes of Apple Pay, Affirm, big platform come from the PayPal co-founder Max Levchin. That's a loan platform which is typically bundled in when you're buying a mattress, for example, focused on millennials. Goldman have their Marcus product. Morgan Stanley have invested in the firm. Of course, Goldman's invested in Apple. So some very big examples there. We have Pled, been acquired by Visa, was almost acquired by Visa, but that's been pedaled back by the regulator for multi-billion-dollar deal. They look at threading bank accounts together, the information that API information in bank accounts, threading those together. BBVA, WeBank, Synapse. There's some good examples to reflect on if you want to have a good look. These are the names I would say are good to reference. And we see a very mixed bag, really. So, big banks, American banks, Goldman, we have Apple too, big companies. And then, Pled started from nothing, became bigger. Bank Mobile are much smaller. So there are lots of players in here. And the main thing is, Apple Pay can go quite far, but it can't go as far as it wants to because the market infrastructure isn't around it. So there is a very big opportunity to develop a wide market infrastructure which is useful for new players here. So there's something for everyone, and we don't know who will grow and who won't. It just depends really on your strategy and your positioning in the market. So yeah, I'll go on now just to the APIs in the market. I don't know if anybody has anything to say about this particular slide. I think we're okay now.
Yeah, well, Matthew, I just wanted to inspire everybody. If you're dialing into this from the GCC or Saudi, some of these examples are very inspiring and they just spark your imagination. So sometimes it's fun to just, even if you just go on YouTube to watch examples of product demos, it'll just spark your imagination to help you think outside the box. So while you might look at those examples and think, oh, they're outside of my region, it's not relevant, it really, some of them are pretty far along and can spark some ideas you can then link into your own environment.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, so a lot of inspiration there. And on that note too, just looking at this slide about APIs, expanding the world of banking, we can see, Uber isn't a bank. Uber was the biggest acquirer, merchant acquirer in New York for a while. Whilst they were onboarding drivers, I think they were doing some savings with them with Betterment. So they became part of the banking system. Again, Ford isn't a bank, but they're looking at Tesla-like cars, which have capabilities for interacting with the internet, with bank accounts, automated payments. Again, the banks we expect to be there, digital companies we expect to be there. Even Coinbase perhaps will have some kind of integration. So we just see with the API economy, application program interface economy, that it's quite possible for finance to reach every single area of your life. So again, something to look at in more detail later to get inspiration. But there's an example in each and every one of those companies.
Yeah, sorry,
yes.
Matt, can I add to that just to also, I guess, give you a bit of a break? So I think just something that's worth mentioning at this stage is we tend to see all of these brands and it feels pretty far away, like Matt said. I mean, it's tough to compete with the likes of Uber or Apple. But I think the purpose and the point here is to say that it's about a product that a customer wants. And I think we tend to all come from the financial side or even the manufacturing side, which is a little bit closer actually to the actual product design, but essentially it's about a product need. Someone that's got a need for a specific product and has got a specific journey in mind in acquiring that product. And then finance essentially just being a kink in that chain. And I think it's important we tend to see these as very big brands, but I think we can also look at smaller products and things that we feel are a product that's relevant to a customer is essentially what we're looking at. And then essentially the journey that gets us there is where embedded finance does really become relevant and important. So even though we're looking at some big brands here, I think you can take this thought local and you can think about products that's extremely relevant and that customers want within your region, close to home, and essentially think about where you can fit in terms of whether it's financing or whether it's on the data front or whether it's on the flexible API front. I think it's important just to contextualize that.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's not all about big finance. And in fact, EY just delivered results from the survey around B2B, a dramatic rise in embedded finance in B2B in MENA, particularly in North Africa. So many smaller applications developing. So yeah, these are larger examples. And we also have a lot coming up from the region in Saudi, which everyone will speak to actually. Hanif has a lot of experience with too. So I look forward to discussing those. So I would say China is the kind of capital of embedded finance. They have had a top-down infrastructure and enabled super apps, which I'll explain to you in just a moment. The important thing to note really with embedded finance globally is, obviously there isn't one global jurisdiction. The development of any fintech platform depends upon the regulatory infrastructure it sits in. I'm from London. We sped ahead for some time because we had a very advanced infrastructure. I actually had a delegation from Chinese banks come to visit me in London about 6 years ago to discuss how we were doing it. Since then, China's surged ahead with this top-down infrastructure and quite a enabled environment around data and transfer, with perhaps not so many guardrails on it, or not as many as we're used to in different jurisdictions. So that's why China is ahead, because it has top-down infrastructure and also the data is allowed to flow very easily. So the infrastructure there is, again, one to look at, but a difficult one to replicate. I think you'll see that Tencent is a better investor around the world than a platform. TikTok has been an absolute success, but it's not a financial platform yet. So they haven't been able to export that expertise just because the dynamics of the market and also the regulatory environment is different. But again, something to study later if you want to look at that. Facebook has a bank. They don't operate it very much. There's a Facebook Pay auction. WhatsApp has experimented with this too. But the big trend we see around the world, starting in China, is these billions of users, monthly active users on each platform, which enable the kind of creation of a super app. So again, Facebook and their stakes, line 2. And again, we can see here, super app is WeChat Alipay, Meituan, which enables you to do multiple things. And really, these are API nerve centers. So a lot of, white label APIs streaming into these super apps that enable a lot of activity. In China, if you're in a traffic jam, someone can come, take you away on a motorbike, and another person will sit in the traffic jam and drive your car home through your app. You can pay them, it's done. So yeah, that's how a super app works. We try and emulate that, but again, we have different market conditions. So just to give you an idea of how far ahead China is as well, Ant Financial can process 512,000 transactions a second. Visa tops out around 18,000. They also have real-time insights. So again, somewhere to look at as a world leader, but perhaps not something we can emulate entirely. We just iterate for our different regional needs. So moving on, we see also Grab, Southeast Asia. Again, this was a kind of Uber type of platform. It grew with a kind of specific advantage in that Southeast Asia doesn't really have a fintech payment mechanism. PayPal didn't exist really in Southeast Asia. There were many different small fragmented players. Grab was able, because of its command of the taxi infrastructure and the way it attracted investment and the way it was positioned around its legal data structure across the whole of ASEAN, it was able to grow extremely quickly and provide a lot of services. So now they got investment from all over the world, really, quite a few diverse jurisdictions in Asia, and they've grown this embedded finance ecosystem. So we've seen something go from very small to very big because there's no other payment rail there. So that's really just an idea of the rest of the world. I'm glad we have really pleased we have expertise from the region as well to talk about how data is working in Saudi Arabia, how data is working across the rest of the region, and how advances are being developed in this space.
Matthew, can you go back to Grab for a moment? Because
Sure.
you bridge that into some of the regional solutions. One thing to highlight about Grab is, as Matthew rightly mentions, there wasn't this payment mechanism which they added to this ride sharing app. But the other important thing to remember about embedded finance is, yes, lending is typically, like, payments are typically the place you start. The second place you typically go is lending, which Grab has done. But the other thing, if Grab just had their, you can read their IPO pitch, etc., and they show their revenue sources across different verticals. And the important thing to remember for Grab, their definition of embedded finance is the classic one, which also includes, by the way, wealth management. It includes, right, savings, investment, insurance, payment, lending, etc., all in one platform. So as they expand into those other areas, bringing all those multiple income and revenue sources. So that's an important thing to remember, that yes, it started with payments, but it really mapped out into all those other areas. So you
Absolutely.
can see that trajectory. So as we jump into the regional GCC and Saudi solutions, it's great to keep that in the back of your mind, so you can say, oh, great, we started something with payments, which I think you're going to jump right into next, Matthew. But then you can think about how that's going to then start to jump into going forward a trajectory across many different verticals as things become integrated.
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously the most curious thing, or the biggest piece about Grab, is that it had access to all of these riders. It was in their hand. So when they're ready to do something else, they went and did it. Again, Goldman has done an interesting thing with Marcus, where they started with wealth management. They started with their client user base, towards the higher end, and then went towards mass affluent. And then they went to loans. So they developed a database around an existing customer base, who they could then start to create, a sensible database from, not a data lake to get lost in. And they then developed lending out of that. So it doesn't have to start anywhere. I mean, the success I've seen is it starts where there's the most traction. So again, here,
that's right. Go for the big user base and play to your strengths and start there and build.
Absolutely, and that's where we find the data right, and the attraction to the product. So we've got here Qarar in the region, payments. We also have in Q8 FinFirst, again, very much around payments. One Global over in Q8, integrated offering for everything, very ambitious program. MasterCard partner. Very interesting to see what MasterCard began to do about 5 years ago. They've realized that their business was very threatened. They could no longer be a gatekeeper to the whole market. So they developed an API strategy. And we see here also with NIMCard and Visa, this strategy that payments companies have, credit card companies, merchants have, of kind of learning that platform, white labeling, enabling you to use their network, but bring your part to it too. So a lot of development like that in the region. Also Emirates MDB with GitHub, looking at transforming their data. So some very kind of focused use cases in the region here. And then just moving to Saudi, we see this graphic from FinTech Saudi, very similar to Grab in a way, very similar to any graphic I could name from around the world. FinTech Saudi really get it. They understand what it is to have an integrated payments infrastructure. The regulator is right there, I think. And Moshab has a lot to say, I think, on data here. I think we all do. So I've given us a global piece from my travels. I know the region quite well, but I think everybody here knows it better. So really throwing it open now to talk about what's happening in Saudi. Perhaps Moshab, you'd like to begin and tell us the latest developments and how you're working.
Sure. Just to give a brief, so one of the major pillars of the 13 executive programs that came out to achieve Vision 2030 was the financial sector development. Its main purpose was to lead to cashless society and drive the financial infrastructure for the e-payments. From that came an initiative from the central bank, which is FinTech Saudi Arabia. So FinTech Saudi Arabia started in 2018. And until now, the response that's been from the central bank and how they've been driving it has been amazing. As per the last numbers that I've got, they've received over 115 applicants. Currently, there are around 16 licensed fintechs in Saudi Arabia. 32 are in sandbox, which gives you that SIMAH is driving a change, but it's also taking it step by step to see if there needs to be if they need to intervene and change the rules and regulations needed to make this market much more suitable for the consumers. But to me, 2020 and COVID was the biggest test for probably fintech in Saudi Arabia and the e-payments in general, and for the central bank to test it out. And the results were very, very promising. The last poll done in 2020 found that around 58% of the population would feel comfortable going online and buying from online and using their phones and apps to do their shopping, compared to around 38 to 40% just the year before. So this 2020, even though it came with a lockdown and it came with a lot of changes, but it came with a new way of thinking, with a new way of approaching things. And I think this has taught the consumer a new behavior to approach, and it will keep growing. From that point, you mentioned clearly today, yes, earlier in the session, that SIMAH has recently announced that they are going to go through with providing 2 fully digital banks licenses to operate in Saudi Arabia. And there's a lot of services that come out of this. You're saying from digital payments, micro lending, crowdfunding, buy now, pay later, and many more from different types of saving platforms that would support. So there's a lot of things covered, and I'm sure there's a lot of things to be covered coming up. I would want to talk about one of the main players, which I would say I would compare to a bank when it comes to the number of credit cards they have or cards they have. So you're saying Apple Card. STC Pay, when they launched their Apple Card, their card, they launched it around 4 to 5 months ago. They had over 1 million people registered to this card. You're talking in 4 months' time, 1 million people applying for a card by STC Pay. The way they're approaching the market is I'm taking over, and I think a lot of people are seeing that the benefits and the services they're introducing are making it much more easier and making it much more attractive for the consumer to start to use. That's from one end, from STC Pay. From another end, you're talking about 2 companies that recently started the buy now, pay later, which is Tabi and SIMAH. I recently had an experience 6 weeks ago. First time I was buying something online, and then I was surprised to see that I can actually, get it on cash payment installments, no interest at all. And it was simple, very straightforward, easy. In seconds, it was done, and it was a smooth process. So I know there's a lot of things going on, like you mentioned here, Tamara, Tabi, Lindo, Foros, STC Pay, and Manafa. There's a lot more that this sector has to offer, and I'm sure that within the months and year coming, there's going to be a huge shift of how consumers, are approaching these softwares and solutions. And one of the things that, going back to the poll, platforms. So banks, I'm working with banks, and banks currently are, actually merging branches. They're being much more strategic, just locating them to strategic locations to allocate that budget for, more licenses, more technologies, more advertising, because they know the focus is going to shift, and smartphones are going to be a primary game in payments and other services as well. So that's a bit of a brief from my end.
Thank you, Musab.
And just thinking about how these, B2C Pay works, how do these platforms function really underneath? We've seen they're very attractive to everybody. You talked about integration with the banks as well. Perhaps it's something that Charles and Michelle wants to talk to too. But how are they working? How can they handle the scale as well? So, I see two elements. One is drawing customers in, knowing where their attention is and increasing their attention, but also then being able to service it in a reliable way. Clearly, SEC Pay has done that, and these other providers too. They're growing very quickly in the region and in Saudi Arabia.
Yes, so you're exactly right. So SEC Pay has done their research, and they are using their data, and they're using the customer data analytics to see the behaviors, to build on that, to take them where they want to go. We have been working with multiple fintechs on how to use this data that SIMAH provides with the softwares that we have for them, make the solutions much more easier and easy to go to market, to approach. So this is just a couple of things that I think they're taking into consideration. I'm sure that Charles from his end has been working directly a lot more with the fintechs or the financial sector and knows the details and in-depth of what they do other than the analytics and the softwares that we provide and providing.
But again, driven by data. This is the main piece, right?
So data is the main thing. I would go into more about it, but there are things that mostly a lot of the consumers are looking for real-time data. So SIMAH has that real-time data. SIMAH provides that real-time data. SIMAH currently is working on a lot of enhancements that are not available currently in the market. So for instance, you're talking about the public government sector, their employment and their income. That's something not currently available in the market. That's something SIMAH is currently in the works of launching. Another thing is the private sector, that employment and that income. It's going to help, along with SIMAH's data, along with their data, bundled up together, will give them, the right analytical strategy approach to move forward. And I think that's where it comes from. So there's a lot of initiatives coming out from the central bank to make data much more easier. There's a lot of, for instance, you're talking about the eKYC, which SIMAH is running. The eKYC would basically minimize fraud and risk and basically make it a paperless.
Removes a lot of friction.
Exactly. So all we need, or all the members who will work with SIMAH will need, is just to get that ID, input it, and they will be linked to all the verified information provided from everywhere in Saudi Arabia. You're talking ID verifications, your bank information, your credit information, your salary, your employment, your national address. These will all be fed and verified and make the process in real time, in seconds, to give a decision. And this is something that's actually, I think, I'm not sure if there's, Matthew, you know of any other country that wants to do an eKYC for the whole country itself.
I know of small jurisdictions, but not a country the size of Saudi Arabia. Jersey, for example, has an eKYC system, and Scotland has one, but the populations are far smaller and they're not nearly as integrated as well as they could be. A lot of cultural barriers to that being implemented. But interesting as well, I know we were talking about this yesterday when we were preparing for the session. Saudi Arabia does have an advantage in this centralized data. I don't know, Charles and Michelle, you observed that as well. It's a very distinct advantage globally,
Absolutely. I mean, that's we discussed this at length yesterday. But I think one of the great advantages is the fact that the region can leapfrog a lot of the standardization effort that's going on all over the world to get data to knock it into a format so it could be usable, right? So I think not just Saudi, but I think overall there's a lot of effort, I think, in the region to reconcile those data sources. I want to just sort of link up with Mossab on the data front, just in terms of some actual experience within the region as well. I think we can all acknowledge that there's been a drive to move a little bit away from traditional data sources, and I mean we've seen the sources popping up everywhere, and I think a great evidence of that is if you just look at some of the origination journeys that you've seen over the last 2 or 3 or even 4 years. If you think just 2 years ago that you had to go through 2 or 3 pages of entering information and demographics, now we're working with multiple banks in the region where it's literally your ID that you input. All of the information is retrieved from external sources, very seamless. Minimal impact on your time, fantastic customer experience, and you walk in and out, or at least through the engagement within 2 or 3 minutes. So I mean it's really fantastic. I think just one thing that I will say, as Matthew was talking about the banks and their position within all of this, one of the research questions that we asked that I think our response for this group was only 10% that felt that banks were going to go extinct within the next couple of years, which is interesting because I think only 1% in terms of the research you've presented, Matthew, felt the same. And for me, that's clear evidence that there's a firm belief in a slight tipping point that we've reached, and that there's a feeling about that banks will have to become part of that journey, a part of that ecosystem. And that means that I think banks will be less reliant on their brand. Their brand will be less relevant to our lives if you start thinking about embedded finance and buy now, pay later, because I truly don't care about whether it's financed by bank A or bank C, as long as I get my product, as long as the experience is seamless. And I think that for me is a very important point to raise in the context of banks' presentation within all of this.
Absolutely, and I agree. The head of corporate governance at OECD, former head of ASIC in Australia, did have that mic drop moment where he said banks would become, platforms really and go towards the background. I think for central banks and for a lot of the main providers as well, they remain important, but they have a different role, certainly in the public eye. And just looking at this wealth of data you have in Saudi Arabia, and also the kind of the parity of it, the enablement of it, it's very nimble. Michelle, what does that mean to you from your experience, globally with the BankersLab, working through data, making systems work? It's kind of music to your ears in the way it's working in Saudi Arabia, I guess, but what does it mean to you, the way the data works?
It's true. I think what we've seen around the world are 2 key elements. On one hand, if you work at a bank and you just heard those comments about the bank brand will become less important, probably your blood might run cold and you might start to sweat nervously. But the good news is that you have the power of a large organization, and the 2 huge game changers that banks continue to articulate to us are working in terms of them succeeding and moving into this area is speed is important. And a large bank a very large bank in the US recently commented to us privately, speed is critical right now. You've got to set up the partnerships quickly with the large players. You've got to really figure out this new product space. You have to move fast now, now's the time. And the other area that has been very important, as Charles was just mentioning, and Mossab, is that user experience is what drives success. So in the past, banks didn't necessarily think in terms of user experience as much. They just thought about, basically in a very, static product way, because that worked for many years. But I think really reorienting your thought process. So when we work with banks, there's a lot of workshopping around, user experience. I'll give you an extreme example of an embedded finance that I saw here in the US. It's a phone app, and let's say you're standing on the corner, and this happens in the Middle East quite a bit. A very cool car drives by, because y'all have some pretty expensive, snazzy cars there, okay, in my experience. more so than other regions. So let's say you're standing there and you see a snazzy car pull up to the intersection and think, that's the car I want to buy. Well, with the app, you point your camera at the car, the AI picks up the make, model, year, etc. And not only that, it tells you then, here's the nearest dealer that has it new, used, etc., available to purchase in these colors. And by the way, here's the financing. That's embedded finance. Standing at the corner, pointing the phone at the car, and then you can just go pick it up and it's financed. So
Wow.
these are kind of really inspirational things we see, and that type of thinking where you rethink your product from the user perspective, I think is something that banks are perfectly capable of doing if they spend the time to sort of stop and do that kind of workshopping and brainstorming.
Right. Yeah, really consumer-focused innovation, right, around the point of interest. We see a lot of innovation dollars poured into banks, and various studies from, the Big Four talk about how efficient the return is. But I think in that example, you can really see how efficient the return is. Grab know how efficient their return is. And again, working with data and finding out exactly how you can increase engagement, I think is a very good marker. On that point, we have here just looking at $124 trillion of global flows. I know we had a question about B2B and merchant banks. We'll come back to that just towards the end, but this partly answers that question. We've seen a lot of movement in the retail space. I was talking with HSBC and Accenture yesterday, the head of analytics here in Europe, about their efforts. That they're getting ready, they're gearing everything up. They've changed their relationships with their B2B clients. But we see here $124 trillion ready for disruption. So banks, as bankers say to me, have a heavy infrastructure, SWIFT, et cetera, they have to have quite heavy fees in servicing this network. But we see now with a lot of fintechs and embedded finance players enabling kind of lowering of that cost, maintaining the security, but lowering that cost. And a big opportunity for disruption B2B, particularly with flows to Asia. So right there's a problem area for the banks, but also an opportunity, and also an opportunity to widen the market by bringing in new players who can develop this. So $124 trillion is not small change. International market open to everybody. So those are facts and figures. We've got some more. How do we get there from here? I think we've spoken about it a little, but as we go towards the end of this webinar and goes to Q&A, it's a perfect opportunity to talk really about best practice. And Michelle, I'd say, is the person who's focused on making this happen. We all make it happen, but I think Michelle's practice is very much around how you get from A to B to Z. So please do tell us about best practice.
Yeah, I mean, I think in many cases, it can be really intimidating to people. And what we really see is that if you can, and even whether, Mossab was talking about the regulatory sandbox where you set up a product in a testing mode, you do different things in test mode first. So, really we start with brainstorming, we brainstorm a product, etc. And then we go into simulation. So let me give you an example of that, working with a solar panel company who's decided, wait a minute, why are the banks financing our products? Why don't we just finance it ourselves? The margins are so much bigger. It's a better experience for the customer. Well, let's simulate that portfolio and play around with what should the credit parameters be, what should the product parameters be, and let's go through using synthetic data so we can come up with our product strategy. Then you do A/B tests on live historical data. If you don't have historical data, then you just start small and set up your A/B tests on the initial starting point of your data. And of course, software all has that capability to easily do that in a plug and play way now that everything's in the cloud and you have great software capabilities. And you learn from those results and continue to iterate. So you don't need to, build it all from day one. You just need to brainstorm and really use that test and learn as your way to keep leveraging that knowledge and go forth. So there is a way forward, whether you are a manufacturing company who wants to get into lending your own products, or you're a bank who wants to rethink your product set, we're finding that this simple paradigm is really very empowering for people, and helps those who say, this is all new for me. You know, there are parts of it we're not comfortable with. That's okay. There's great software out there. There's great ways to test your way into a new product space.
Absolutely. So this is really the sandbox, I would say, environment, right, in a way as well. But yeah, there is a method. So we've spoken really about large platforms, smaller platforms, region-specific ones. But thank you, Michelle, for explaining, you know, how you do get there. Again, I've spoken to lots of banks, so a big question often is, how do we avoid getting lost in the weeds? How do we know who to educate for what? But, you know, there's a methodology right there for that with the BankersLab. And I don't know, Charlotte Motlab as well. Do you see that in your work as you implement?
Absolutely. I think, Matthew, I think we have to acknowledge that these things take time, right? And I think what Michelle said before in terms of starting to at least dream and visualizing where you as an individual representing a certain bank could sit in terms of what a product would look like, dreaming about that. I mean, there's so many wonderful simulation tools out there today to start helping you. Gamification, AR, VR, all of those buzzwords are important. But I think we'll get now to the things that we feel and we've seen to be a shortage in terms of enabling this within the organization. But I think gamification, dreaming about the vision for your product or enabling the financing of the product and you being part of that journey is absolutely necessary. I think telling stories with data, telling stories with financing, it sounds playful, but I think that starts to generate a lot of ideas. That's what we've seen in the market. And what's also interesting is that if you start looking at the evolving skill set within the organization, you start seeing customer experience experts becoming behavioral psychologists, becoming part of the journeys. It's very interesting. I think the legacy has always been, let's just throw a CDO at the problem, and that solves all of our data problems. But I think what Michelle said pretty well there is that driving ideas and generating ideas through creativity, I think is absolutely key. Otherwise, we'll all just sit on a pile of data and we can't really utilize it for anything, right? So I think that's a very key, I think, observation that I've seen locally as well.
Absolutely, yeah. There is a process now for ideation. It's not called ideation for nothing. It's an idea, right?
Yeah. And
I can't see a CDO coming up with a car BR. Maybe they did, but it sounds to me like you need to have a kind of focus group and ideation around it. And very, very important around innovation. You know, Clayton Christensen with the Innovator's Dilemma says that this kind of play is a very important part of business now. So we see that as data gets real, I would say. Quick poll here, as we go towards the end. What do you see as the biggest hurdle, you know, given what we just said, to rolling out embedded finance in your organization? Data, software, culture, skills. You can only pick one, so I guess what's the biggest? We'll give you all a break for 20 seconds from us talking. But yeah, what's the biggest hurdle? Yeah, I think you're right. Some or all of the above. And again, depends how far you are on your journey. I mean, please do tell us, panelists too, what you think of these.
Well, I kind of do agree, but I also do see the shift and the change. So data is is becoming more and more available in real time. So SIMAH is playing a role of that with also multiple data providers in the region. So I think that is going to be shifting towards much more smoother and easier process. Softwares and culture, I'd like to mix both of them. Yesterday when Michelle, we discussed, okay, so Saudi Arabia is coming up with hackathons. Okay, so there's a lot of hackathons that bring in the students and universities and bring those ideas and sponsor them. So you're talking about King Fahd University of Petroleum Minerals, King Saud University. You're talking about one of the fintech funds led by Riyadh Bank. You're talking about the sandbox itself. So the idea to bring in and make these innovations come to life are given and are being, the opportunity is there. So I think with time, you would see that there is a huge shift to how softwares and the culture mindset and the data will be being used. And of course, skills, that's something, we can always need, but there's a word that I read somewhere that I think we need to be engineers, something like that. It's called engineers, which is basically you use your left and your right hemisphere and your brain to come up, to adapt, to be creative, to be self-learning. The old mentality of something fixed can't be changed, I think that needs to be driven away, and that needs to be changed.
Just one quick thing. Sorry, Matt, that I'll just add. I know we're running out of time. Maybe just two more subpoints. I do think we've come out of a time where we want to try and service all of these things equally well within one organization. Where I do feel there's also a broader acceptance in terms of partnership out there, and I think it's a key enabler. Getting all four of those right in your first try, I think is a tall order for everyone. So I think we need to play to our strengths and partner on the other fronts. I think an ecosystem of services is essentially, especially in more, I guess, the Western world is what we're looking at, and partnership is a key part within that, I think.
Yeah, I see that as a success factor. Starling Bank in the UK has a very good study from MIT just into their practices, and they did culturally and technically merge, so everybody had a shared function. I see that across the board. I'm sure, Michelle, you probably agree. The most successful embedded finance projects have multiple different people working on each piece. They work out what their best attributes are, and they do it. And there's a structure to that as well. We're getting towards the end, but quick questions, if you could perhaps some very pithy answers. What were the lessons learned from embedded finance so far? I feel we've answered that in the fact that it's important to have a very wide overview, ideation, and a strategy around it. What data sources are available now? What skill sets might be needed? Or what type of challenges do you think we'll see? Anybody want to address any of those in a short form?
Yeah, no, I think I'll add to just, I think you've mentioned customer experience. I think the customer has to win in this journey, which is something that excites me. And the other one is obviously the flexible partnership. I feel that's a critical enabler to enable this within the organization.
Awesome.
That's a point very well taken. I remember the good old days. We always used to have these buy versus build debates. And at this point, with the proliferation of APIs, there's data available, there is so fantastic feature-rich software available in the cloud that gets updated for you constantly with new features. It's like what would you build yourself? And what's left, right? And I think what's left is the customer experience after all of that. If you think about it, in the buy versus build, if you can find a way to drive the customer experience, you drive a big customer base, and you can buy everything else now. So at the extreme, obviously that's an extreme way to look at it, but I think it just takes some time to stay up to speed and be knowledgeable about all the toys out there that you can buy and play with these days to put together new solutions.
Right, so it's kind of KPI in a way, right? The CX there, really, that's where you get to see the tip of the iceberg or the top of what you're doing. Perfect. And I think we've got some key building blocks. Sorry, Michelle, you were saying something.
Go ahead. No, go ahead to the next one.
Oh, cool. Yeah, so we have some key building blocks which we've already covered, but again, for future reference, we got them here on the screen in the slide deck, which is easily available from us here.
Matthew, just one thing.
Yes, sorry.
just this very short. A major thing coming in probably in the future we might see very soon is open banking in Saudi Arabia. With the open banking coming, the sky's the limit for what kind of data you will be able to get and how you can work with it. So I think the future is very bright, and with the drive of Vision 2030 and with the drive of the central bank to achieve one of the main pillars, I think Saudi Arabia is set to meet these challenges and exceed them. And this is what we're hoping for.
I certainly agree. Open banking has opened up a lot. This is why the Chinese banks came to see me back in 2012, because they wondered what we were doing, and we've seen what happened there. So yeah, absolutely. And a good time really to pick up a question we had, which was really about corporate finance, I think. I'll just get back to the question before we wrap up. Apologies, we're going to run over by a couple of minutes, I think, at this point. We had a lot of content come through. Saying here, Hannah Patel, the real challenge would be to orchestrate larger transactions within corporate wholesale banking. This hasn't really been a big area of innovation, Hannah, for saying the banks remain dominant. Is there any progress in corporate and wholesale banking? I can answer that globally, but perhaps more efficient to talk about the region.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I'll take a stab at it. I think a really good question, Hannah, and as I was thinking about it, we weren't ignoring you on purpose. It's a tough one, because let's be honest, I think on the corporate side, the wholesale side, things tend to move a little bit slower when it comes to innovation, just because of the size of the prize, right? But I also do feel that banks, especially in that segment, will continue to play a big part of the ecosystem, and I don't think it's about excluding them, but more about where do we leverage their key utility versus not. So I think in that particular segment, I mean, we've seen anecdotal movement, but I think not to the rate as what we've seen on the consumer and the retail part. I think that it's definitely been a push on that side. So I think it has to come around at some point, but I think the banks in that segment will continue to play a big part in that ecosystem.
Yeah, I agree, absolutely. I mean, I have seen some global examples. Stanchart is a bank to watch, certainly moving towards Southeast Asia in terms of their work there. And you can't downplay the role of Sharia as well. It's not a massive market, but it is significant. And I'm seeing a lot of actually blockchain applications around Sharia and open banking applications around it. So yes, it's a bigger one to disrupt, but we do see in capital markets a lot of disruption too. So I think it's going to be one of the last bastions to be transformed, I would say, but it's coming, but as you observe, not yet. Another question we got here, apologies we've run over, but if you will bear with us just a moment. Why banks doesn't want to involve in risk ventures and divert business risk to credit insurance companies? So looking at credit insurance companies, why are banks withdrawing from risk ventures? I'm probably in reference to open banking. I imagine I've seen this quite a lot in open banking, where the bank, I know in many jurisdictions, has to carry its license and it's responsible for everything that's transacted around it. So in the jurisdictions I'm familiar with, the bank normally holds this, but Quaid is saying this is going over to credit insurance companies. I don't know if anybody has an answer right now, or perhaps you might want to answer that one later.
I think it's not a clear answer. Again, a very good question. I think something that's been mulled over for a long time, but I think to your point, Matthew, and even more so within this region, it's about the license, and a license is also not an easy thing to come by. So the risk management piece has tend to be kept internally. And if you think about partnerships and skill sets and all of that, I mean, that's still within the region, at least something that I see as a key priority, is to have a very well-established internal risk function to manage that with. So I mean, I haven't seen too much movement on that front, and possibly one of the last functions, I think, where outsourcing or at least partnership will be considered.
Absolutely. Thank you for that answer. So to be continued really around that, I work with quite a lot of regulators who are looking at different ways of moving this, because obviously regulation is an enabler. It can also be a barrier. So yeah, watch this space. I think time now just to go to enablers, as we say. Regulation is one. I'm just looking at the slide here. That's a pleasure, Qued, sorry. And we've got a slide here with data, cloud, ecosystem, skills. So yeah, I guess future reference. These are key enablers. Also, obviously, ecosystem partnerships. I would include regulation with that. The regulator is quite open, right? It's a different relationship now. Perfect. And then action plan. So where do you go from here? Like, just to sum up, how do we begin to do this? So thank you for waiting with us and bearing with us. Just as we sum up now, you know, thinking outside the box, as Michelle was saying, then CX and then testing and learning are the key elements of the action plan. I don't know, any of the practitioners here want to go a bit deeper into any of these areas?
No, I think in this action plan, this is really thinking about a bank launching a new product, or somebody outside of banking, like manufacturing, then getting into finance. But there's part of this that is unsaid, but I want to make sure it's called out. You were mentioning, we were just talking about risk management. Of course, you need a skilled practitioner to manage the risk in the portfolio, right? So that's why either you need a partner or you need that competency. So that goes without, I guess you shouldn't have to say that, although we've seen some fintechs launch without a strong risk management competency, and we've seen them take some big losses as a result. So it goes without saying, but just a reminder, a note from your sponsor, make sure that you have skilled practitioners managing the risk so that you don't end up with a bad result at the end. Otherwise, if you know you've got that backbone, strong regulations, strong data protection, then you can go play with the CX and have fun creating your products and dream big.
Exactly, yeah. Ideation is all good when you have a risk manager to get the wheels back down on the ground when you need to.
That's right.
So yeah, I think great place to sum up, really. You know, a lot of ideation involved. There is a science to this, but also risk management plays a key part. And you know, you want to be able to take something cogent to your risk manager. So you see there's a lot of work to do ahead of it, but a lot of massive opportunities here. So I don't know if anybody else has got anything to say. Apologies, I've been talking a lot today as a moderator. I'm glad to learn more about the region and specifically more about what's happening in Saudi. I think it's a really exciting market. You know, I'd love to come back and discuss it another time. But if anybody wants to get in touch with us in the meantime, you know, I'm A1AI, Michelle's at BankersLab. We have also Qarar, and we have SIMAH there. So please do get in touch with us. Any of our addresses here. We'll send you the slides. You can see our emails on our website. So please do get in touch. And if anybody else has anything to say, apologies, we have run over a little bit. Anybody else like to sum up?
Okay, thank you.
We're good. Okay, great.
Big.
Thank you, Matt.
Yeah. My pleasure. Thank you too, and look forward to checking in and seeing how everything's built in Saudi as you race forward with this. Okay, well, shukran, and speak again. Thank you.
Yes, thanks to all of you.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.
Thank you, Matthew, Michelle, and thanks, Carl.